Team is a pro team, aren't they? So Reverend Karen is away with Gene Houston this weekend, and when we were talking about the dates, and we were talking, and I said, so you know there's a lot going on this weekend. There's this little thing called an inauguration, there's the Women's March, there's a little bit of energy swirling around right now. And she said, yeah, I know, it's a good time to get out of town. So I'm grateful to be able to step in. I have many different roles here, and I'm grateful to be able to step into this new role. I couldn't ask for a better community and place to do that. I have already felt this tremendous love coming towards me and the encouragement. And so I thank you for, thank you. You're supposed to wait till the end. So I was at the march yesterday. Anybody else at the march? Yeah. So I felt strongly compelled to march. And there were people there that had been marching for decades. There were first-timers. I was a newbie. So I've believed in marching. I've filled out ballots. I've cheered people on from a distance. I've voted. I felt like I've done my civic duty. But I've been listening to Tom Hartman quite a bit. He's a radio host. And one of the sayings he says very often is, democracy is not a spectator sport, regardless of your political affiliation and how you identify yourself. And that has really resonated with me. And so I felt compelled to march for several reasons. One, I felt I needed to be more active in what I valued and believed in. There was also something really powerful about coming together in unity. There was, at first they were, I think, estimating about 50,000 people in Seattle, and I think the latest count was somewhere around 175,000. And there were 660 marches going on around the world on every continent, yes, even Antarctica. I didn't get time to research how that actually worked. And what I noticed as I was participating during the day yesterday, I was with my friend Dawn, and we were seeing a lot of activity, and there was an incredible patience. Because I know a lot of the time I was in this bottleneck, and we just waited for hours just to be able to move. It wasn't really a march, it was more of a shuffle. I had this, and then stand, wait, shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. And we had 2 eagles flying overhead. That was really incredibly powerful. I don't know how many were at that part. And my friend Dawn and I looked at each other, and as we were seeing Captain America flying by, we were saying, "Ow!" in total unison. We said, "We should have come as Wonder Women." And wouldn't that have been so fun? And then as it turns out, there were Wonder Women along the march as well. And for the most part, something that stood out to me was the kindness and patience. Yet, I also know there was not always patience and a little bit of vitriol out there as well, and excitement. And so I wanted to speak to that. We had, of course, an inauguration on Friday. And so I've been listening for really the last year, and particularly the last several months, a lot of personal stories from different perspectives, because I've wanted to broaden my awareness and understanding. I've wanted to open up my consciousness to even those that may have a different viewpoint than my own. I want to seek understanding and remain in that place of curiosity and open-heartedness. And so I've been listening to a lot of stories, and so right now, with the inauguration on Friday, there are millions of people that are incredibly hopeful and excited. They believe that this new administration is going to bring stronger economic vitality to more Americans, stronger national security. They really look forward to the next several years. And I also know there are millions of people that are fearful and anxious and maybe even angry, uncertain of these times. They're concerned that equalities and justices that have been fought for might be taken away. People that have been marginalized might be further marginalized. And we know that there's millions in between these two extremes. And so I think our great work right now, it's our work that's called for in our democracy, but it's our great spiritual work, is how do we show up in these places with different voices, different perspectives, different beliefs, and still hold an open heart, right? Because that is our great spiritual work. And I know that I'm having to do my spiritual practices a whole lot harder right now. I have to be more dedicated. I notice that I go into my meditation in the morning and my prayer time, and I'm centered and I'm peaceful and I'm calm, and I come out of that and I have these kumbaya moments. Have any of those in your meditation times? And then I read or listen to a news segment, and I can easily flip into, what are they thinking? And then the internal warning bells start going off because the insidious they has creeped into my consciousness. The insidious you. And the danger in that is that it's very easy for us to separate and say, I'm not like them, they, you. And so it creates more of this bubble and these divides that can separate us, rather than how do we reach into knowing and understanding the other perspective. And that is our first unity principle, is that we are all God, even when we have different perspectives, even when we have different viewpoints. We are all one. So yes, we acknowledge that we are each individuals with our unique beliefs and perspectives. And again, how do we hold both? How do we remain centered in that unity and that place of connection, even when I disagree with another's perspective? How do we continue to stand for what we believe in without tearing down somebody else? And so that's really our great work right now that we get to step into together. And so I went last week to see the movie Hidden Figures. Has anybody seen that? Yes, yes. If you have not seen it, go see it. It's an amazing movie. It's a fantastic story. It's based on true stories, real lives. It's based on the book by Margot Lee Shetterly called Hidden Figures. And the book catalogs hundreds of women over decades that worked for the space program as human computers. So before we had technology that we have today, before we had computers, there were humans that did all of those calculations. And a lot of them were women, and there was segregation, and so there were the colored computers. And so the movie highlights three women in particular, three amazing African-American women that were instrumental in us succeeding in the space race and getting the first Americans into orbit. And so Katherine Johnson is an amazing mathematician. She was finally awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2015 for her contribution in her work. Truly a genius. So she did mathematics in her head that was incredible. And Dorothy Vaughan, who was a supervisor, she had to fight for that title. She had to fight for that role. And she saw the trend that was happening with computers. She saw the very first IBM machines that were, seemed like they took up an entire block when they came into NASA. And she saw the trend that human computers were going to go away. And so she took the initiative to self-teach herself Fortran, which was the programming language at the time, and then she taught other women so that they could be ready, so they would have a job when these new technologies, this new computer came in. And then Mary Jackson, who was the first Black African-American woman, female engineer that worked for NASA. And so she had to forge through two barriers. She had to forge through sexism and racism at a time where Virginia was still segregated, and she had to go to the courts to even be allowed to take classes to become an engineer. And so these three women, their story is incredible and amazing. And the things that stood out for me with that movie and resonate now in our times is, well, first there's a bittersweetness, because as I first heard their stories, I couldn't help but ask the question, why has it taken us so long to hear their stories? So we're talking about these women were in the 1950s and 1960s. and we're just now hearing their stories. And so there's a part of me that question keeps resonating and staying with me, like, why has it taken us so long to hear their stories? And I think how that fits in right now is some people feel that we're revisiting issues that we feel like we've visited before. The other thing that really stood out for me with these women and their story is the incredible dignity and perseverance with which they showed up every single day to their lives and their work, and they were standing for greater equality, greater justice, and just basic human decency. And really, they were there and they were present and they were educating people on the things that other people weren't even aware of, as discrimination or racism or sexism. It just wasn't even in their awareness. So these women were there every single day fighting for that, bringing greater awareness to the people that they worked with and lived with. And I think we're called to that right now as well. We each have an individual responsibility in how we show up in the world and how we are present with one another. Margot Lee Shetterly had this to say about it. History is the sum total of what all of us do on a daily basis. We think of capital H as being these huge figures, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Martin Luther King. Even so, she explains, you go to bed at night, you wake up the next morning, and yesterday is history. These small actions, in some ways, are more important, or certainly as important, as the individual actions by these towering figures. And so that's where each of us gets to step in our daily lives, in our relationships, in our communities, and how we show up in the world together. My faith remains really strong right now. So in Unity, we talk about faith. It's not something that comes and goes, even though it may feel that way. We all have as much faith as we'll ever need. It's just a question of how anchored are we to it? How much is our awareness staying fixed on it? And I remain very hopeful and excited about these times because I feel that when there is tremendous challenge, there's also incredible opportunity for tremendous breakthrough. It's those times when we feel most sort of pushed back and divisive that we have great challenges to step into and then change and shift in how we show up with those. And I know some people feel like we're taking a step forward and then we're being pulled back. And this was even in President Obama's farewell address. He spoke to that as well. But really in that grand arc of time in our country, we always progress. We always have greater equality, greater justice. We continue to bring more people along. So rather than thinking of it as stepping forward and stepping back, I like to think of it, and I really see it, as this great progressing spiral upward. And yes, we come back to revisit certain issues, but each time we revisit them, we get a chance to anchor more strongly in our highest values. And each time we get to bring more people along with us so that there aren't people that are left off to the side, there aren't people that are left behind. And so in this great spiral upwards, we continue to get to grow and collectively bring more of us along. And so I think that's one of the great opportunities in this time of being able to step forward together and seek those places of connection, seek those places of where we can come together and create a better world for all of us, for all people. I encourage us to invest regularly in refilling our spiritual reservoirs together. Whatever that looks like for you, whether it's being in nature, sitting down with a friend and a cup of tea, going and having your meditation time, having your retreat time. And even if you never step forward and march or do anything like that out in the world, most important is what we're doing with our own consciousness. And where are we staying centered in our own lives? And that's the place where we have to begin. Are we staying in a place centered in our hearts? Where's our consciousness? Is it moving to the place of judgment, or is it moving to the place of how do we unify and come together? Even as we stand for our truth and what we believe in and our values, how do we stay connected? How do we stay in unity and unified together? So I'm going to be teaching a class you'd seen starting today. It's Unity Practices and Principles. I invite you, if this resonates with you, to come and join me and join all of us that are going to be diving into that, diving deep together. The reason is because we need to work together more in our spiritual practices, especially now. And that is our fifth principle in Unity, is how are we walking our talk, right? How are we living this daily? And so it's not a matter of we go and do our spiritual practice and then when we show up in the world, it's that our spiritual practice and principles are integrated in every part of our life. And so how do we do that more and more so that we continue to grow our capacity to be forces for good in the world and in our lives and in our families and in our communities? How do we continue to build our light and then be that light out in the world, as Reverend Karen was talking about last week? And so Clarissa Pinkola Estes, she wrote a blog recently called "We Were Made for These Times," and it really resonated with me, and it's too long to read the entire thing. I invite you and encourage you to go read the entire blog, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of pieces out of her blog. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our reach. Any small, calm thing that one soul can do to help another soul, to assist some portion of this small, poor, suffering world, will help immensely. It is not given to us to know which acts or by whom will cause the critical mass to tip toward enduring good. Struggling souls catch light from other souls who are fully lit and willing to show it. If you would calm the tumult, this is the one strongest thing you can do. And so I encourage all of us to find those ways to connect, to fill our light, so that we can be that light with one another in our own lives, in our families, in our communities, as well as in the world. Thank you.
So